Hello and welcome to Better Together.
I'm Tony.
And I'm Kimberly.
And we want to talk to you about some fun stuff today. We want to bring value into your communication and your relationships. We're going to be speaking largely from the context of marriage, but this should apply in a lot of different relationships. This can apply to your siblings.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, siblings,
Working?
co-workers.
Oh, good. Working
whatever.
relationships.
Yep. So I want to talk about diagnosing, and this is going to sound somewhat clinical, but I think this is a skill that every man and every woman, I think it's a skill that all of us need. We're going to talk about finding the dilemma behind the emotional response. Have you ever had a conversation with somebody and all of a sudden in the context of that conversation, somebody gets very emotional very, very quick and you're kind of going, why are you so upset?
All the time.
Yeah.
It happens to me all the time.
All the time. So let's talk about the emotional response and what that emotional response is indicating. Very often, I think I say it this way: your mind or your thinking determines your behavior or your emotional response. So your feelings follow your focus. That's another way of looking at it. So when you focus on something that somebody is saying, it is going to immediately spark a feeling on the inside of you. So when you see what I refer to...
Well, give me an example.
So let's say you're talking to someone and they have a disproportionate response to the conversation, and it's in the context of maybe relationships. Let's just say you're talking to somebody and they have a disproportionate response when you're talking about relationships. Well, generally, that will indicate that they have a hurt or they have an issue that is very, very raw. It's like when I'm talking to you about something and all of a sudden you have a heightened emotional or disproportionate emotional response. As a husband, I can either get upset or say she's crazy or do whatever, or I can realize
he has said that I was crazy.
I've learned a lot, because if you don't know this, you don't know what to do. But when somebody has an emotional response, it's usually just that. It is an emotional response. They're triggering something. So it's almost like an invitation for you to investigate. So husbands, let's say you're talking to your wife and your wife blows up in regards to something you said about her mother.
You didn't know you were a private investigator.
Yeah. So guys, and this works both ways. So ladies, pay attention. If your husband suddenly shuts down over something, it's an indication that there's an issue there. Now, is it a lie? In other words, is there a lie that's causing them to see things in an erroneous way? Is it a unresolved hurt, and does forgiveness need to happen? Very often in counseling, I can be talking to a woman, and I will ask, so what's your mom's name? And they will tell me their mom's name. And as I say, how is your mom? I can see on their face the emotional relationship or the relationship that they have with their mom. There's so many times, and guys maybe aren't quite as overtly expressive by nature, but all of a sudden, and I'm saying this so that we'll get this is an incredibly necessary tool and observation that we really need to make. When you see a disproportionate emotional response in the context of an argument or a conversation or whatever with your spouse, it's an indicator of something that needs to be addressed. Now, might not want to address it, right?
Might not be time to address it.
Might need to step back and give it a moment, but make a mental note that I pushed a button. And if you will find the wire that's connected to that button, you will be doing you both a big, big favor. So once you have found the button, and I don't know exactly what example to use. Let's just say maybe somebody has daddy issues, or somebody has mommy issues, or failed expectations concerning parenting.
Yeah, well, and I would say that I think my parents tried the best they could to raise me with the tools that they had.
And I think most of us would say that.
Right. So whatever I share, I'm not dissing my parents in the least, but I would say I probably did struggle with that. Like, I felt like, and I don't necessarily think my parents or my dad in particular, since daddy issues, I don't know that I necessarily had daddy issues, but I do want to say my dad was gone a lot. I mean, he was a working dad. And so I felt like he wasn't often engaged in my life But if I did, I knew where I stood with him though.
So let's take that for example.
Make no bones about it. I knew there were certain things that I was not supposed to cross.
Okay.
And if I did, I was going to get his heightened emotional response to
His
that.
disproportionate emotional response.
Yes.
And maybe he responded disproportionately because he felt like he was out of control and needed to exercise control. But let me tell you how that would affect her. Let's just say I come home and I don't spend the amount of time that she would think necessary with the kids. Okay, or with her. Now, all of a sudden, if I see an emotional response concerning the time and the prioritization of the family, then that tells me maybe she's operating out of a fear concerning what happened to her and her experience.
Yeah.
So generally, I think if you'll ask the Holy Spirit to help you and not just blow it off, you'll be able to say and you can address the issue. You can point out that, maybe you were neglected. Maybe there were responsibilities. Maybe now I can relate to what your father was going through. Here's the lie, though. The lie was she didn't feel like a priority.
Right.
Do you see? So how do you deal with that? One, your dad did prioritize you. He did love you, but he also had a lot of responsibilities.
Yeah.
You were an only child. He was in the military. It meant that he had to be gone. Now, her 5-year-old mind might not understand that, but her 45 or 50-year-old mind can comprehend that. But if you don't bring that out and kind of deal with that,
yeah.
Beautiful example of how an emotional response can lead to somewhere that is very healthy and healing and restorative. If you don't read those correctly, it can just end up in a vicious cycle. So, are there any lies or unsettled issues, in your life or in your relationship that you may be missing, that may be obvious if you're paying attention?
Yeah, well, right, and in your working relationships.
Working relationships, yeah.
As well, like what if you share an office with someone? What are the things that you've noticed? And you have to ask yourself, though, you have to recognize, I think, especially if you're sharing an office, what value and good do they bring? Not always looking at negative.
Yeah.
Expose the lie.
Yeah. When people are hurting, look for the lie. Very often people who are angry and mean, they're actually scared and insecure. But it comes across as angry and mean. Why? Because they don't want to feel vulnerable because of their insecurity. In an office working space, that can be very detrimental. In a family, my insecurities could make her miserable. And guys, you know how we need validation from our wives. And ladies, if you don't know this, we're going to talk about love and respect in a later episode. But listen to me. We need you. If you're not our biggest cheerleaders, we are so insecure. Oh my gracious.
Here's a fun fact that you might not think is so fun, but he is an adult. He is grown. He is a man. But inside, I say, there is this 12-year-old boy. And if you could tap into that 12-year-old boy that needs encouragement, needs support, right?
Yeah.
To be his cheerleader, his advocate for doing well.
Let me clarify. That is not towards everybody. That is with my wife,
Yes.
But that's a special place. It's a special bond that we have in our relationship, and you hopefully have in yours. But you need to realize that I am tender and vulnerable, and I insecure when it comes to her perception of me. And you may say, well, my husband, he's not insecure. Trust me, a lot of what he does is probably to impress you. You're just not paying attention. And they're right, guys. Anyway, listen, I hope this has been helpful. Take this tool.
Yeah.
It may feel uncomfortable in your hand for a season, but hone it. Use it.
Do not give up.
Don't give up. And if you have the right tools, you can build something absolutely beautiful. Okay, thank you for joining us. We look forward to seeing you next time on
Better Together.